Yeah.
But anyway, they are
bring
still
in-
struggling, though, to
let's
try
bring
to free
in-
themselves from the government's grasp, and more intervention coming for the financial sector. That's one of the big questions. Let's bring back Republican Congressman Ron Paul, who, by the way, is a prolific author. The latest book just out, hitting the bookstores this week, In the Fed. And Peter Marissi, the economist for the University of Maryland. And, you know, Peter, you get back into this thing. On 60 Minutes the other night, you know, there's the president talking about this, and it was interesting because he brought home that point about the fact that Medicare is such a fast-growing part of the budget that it's killing the federal budget. And so everybody kind of agrees with him on that. But that's where the government spends money. So why doesn't he just come out and say we need to fix Medicare, or would that be politically unpopular because the seniors would revolt?
Well, you have to remember that Medicare has to pay the prices in the marketplace. Now, it can regulate them somewhat and gets away a little bit cheaper, but it is heavily influenced by what private insurers already pay and the cost structures in the hospitals. The bottom line is that our hospitals are run very badly. Our private insurers charge too much overhead. We pay too much for drugs, and on it goes. The basic cost structure we talked about earlier is out of whack, and that to fix that would require them to take on the malpractice lawyers, the drug companies, the insurance company overhead, and the way hospitals are run. But we saw right off the bat the president disavowed doing anything about the torts lawyers because they support the Democratic Party. So if he's not going to take on his personal special interest, the other special interest can't be expected to give very much. The drug manufacturers have offered a little bit on the Medicare drug payments, $80 billion, but that's not really a lot in the grand scheme of things. The president said during the campaign he'd take on the special interest. Now that he's president of the United States, we find out he took a lot of campaign money from them, and he's nuzzling up to them and basically giving us a health care reform program that will raise our medical costs and drive even further through the ceiling the cost of Medicare and make the budget deficits worse. $1 trillion, that's a fantasy. It's going to be much worse than that.
Let's move over and talk again. We started out talking about the financials and about Citigroup. I want to bring Congressman Paul into this because, you know, this week, as you know, is the one-year anniversary of the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And as the president talks about more financial regulation over the banks, investment banks, over the economy overall, do you think that he's moving in the right direction? And how much regulation do you think, Congressman, is going to be too much regulation for the banks?
Well, we already have too much, and the regulations we had didn't do any good. So I would say we need a lot less regulation on private industry other than fraud. And this is what you have to regulate: fraud, and never protect people who don't make profits. When they go bankrupt, they should be liquidated. So we need more of the marketplace, but we need more regulations on the Congress from spending this money and TARP funds, more regulations on the Treasury. And well, it would be nice if we could insist they only pass laws that are constitutional, and you know, and do things along that line. But we need like regulations on the Federal Reserve. I mean, the Federal Reserve gets away with, you know, political murder, you know, so to speak, financial murder. They get to create the money and spend the money, and then they're talking. Some people, like the president, sincere. Oh, now that we've really messed this thing up, what we need to do is give more regulatory powers to the Federal Reserve.
Congressman,
I mean, I just can't believe this sometimes.
As a libertarian, do you feel that you are a voice crying out in the wilderness, a lone voice crying out in the wilderness, or that maybe the rest of the country is sort of catching up to you now? How do you feel down there in Washington right now?
I'm a lot more comfortable now than I was a few years ago. I never dreamed there would be this much support for these views. But it's the financial crisis that has brought this to light. And, you know, this whole idea that we have 290 co-sponsors of a bill to look into the Fed and find out what kind of shenanigans they're up to, I mean, that is unreal. So I would say the country... I think are wakening up, and the Congress is starting to listen, but the problems are so big that it's not going to be smooth sailing. But we have to decide whether we want to live in a free society, free market, sound money, limited government, balanced budgets, a sensible foreign policy, or we want to continue, you know, to run the world, police the world, run up the welfare state, and when we mess up medicine after 45 years of managed care, add up more management, continue with the inflation. I mean, if we decide on that, then we're not going to solve it. But we're in this transition, and the people are trying to assess it. Hopefully I can push them in a certain direction I like.
Guys, a lot is changing right now in the scope of the financial system. And if you look at the potential for bank failures, we've had, what, 83, 86 so far this year, Kathy? But we've still got folks like Dick Bove saying there's going to be 200 bank failures and that's going to stress the system, stress the FDIC. So that kind of is the argument on the other side, that you need more regulation to protect American banks and American consumers.
Well, I think you have the old boy network that goes quite a ways with certain companies being able to extend their hands into things they shouldn't have been. I don't know whether regulation would solve it. You have to have sound business practices, as Mr. Paul is saying, but I think, you know, you look at the commercial real estate, I think that's going to really impact these banks, and a lot of the smaller banks in the Midwest and throughout the United States are going to be really hit hard because they rely on that business.
Right. So you think that we still have to worry about the failures, but at the same time, it's the commercial real estate side of it that's the issue.
Right now,
okay.
absolutely.
That makes sense.
Yep.
You know what, hey, Peter, let me ask you this. Do you think that this president overall is trying to take on too much, whether that is politically, whether that's fiscally right now?
He's trying to take on too much. His first focus should be on the economy and the banks, not on health care. But within banks, he wants to do terribly complicated things when the reforms that are necessary are quite simple. For example, swaps and derivatives, those are essentially loss-stop insurance policies, much like hurricane insurance. They weren't backed up by adequate assets. You know, a derivative ought to have a prospectus. That is a paper trail that takes it back to the original issuer, and it should be backed up by the physical or financial assets necessary to make good. AIG didn't have those financial assets. That's why they ended up in the situation they were in a down market. The reforms that would be necessary would be to make regulations less complex, not more, and perhaps it's time to start looking at having broken up some of these larger institutions. I don't want to see Citigroup necessarily buy back shares if it's going to go forward as such a large and complicated enterprise that it can't be managed and it'll get into this kind of trouble again because we'll pay for it again.
I wonder, Congressman Paul, you know, I know that you're not a big fan of the Fed, but at the same time, we do have just a few large banks left. I mean, that makes the too big to fail argument kind of in our face again, really, as a nation.
Well, but the problem didn't come from the free market. It came from the bailout system and the inflationary system and all the regulations that were misdirected. That's where it is. So it is a mess. But ultimately, to get back on our feet and get back being a productive, growing economy, you have to get rid of all the bad assets and you have to liquidate the debt. And the faster you do it, the better. The prolongation is what the greatest danger is. We're prolonging the agony, and until we realize that, this is going to be just delayed endlessly.
Congressman Paul, Peter Morici, thank you both very much. We'll be right